want to talk to you for just a few minutes about why every Christian should wear a clerical collar. Why every Christian should wear a clerical collar. I have a brother who's a couple of years older than I am and a lot better looking than I am as well. I'm from Mississippi. I'm real proud of him. He's the principal of the high school that both he and I graduated from. He's been in this role for a couple of years now and sort of worked his way up into that. A few years ago, my wife and I were home at Christmas, and we were talking, my brother and I and his wife and my wife, we were talking about our different jobs. I'm honored to serve here at Southeastern as a professor of theology and history of ideas, and my brother as a principal, and we're talking about, I was asking him, what do you do on a daily basis? What does your day look like? What does your vocation look like? And he goes on to tell me a story about a kid named Corey. And this is a day-to-day thing for him. He tells me about a kid named Corey who had been in and out of trouble quite a bit in the high school there that I grew up in. Had to do with drugs, had to do with theft, had to do with just a number of things that teenagers often get into. But I was really proud, Brandon, my brother, he talked to Corey, and he didn't just do his job of administering discipline to Corey. He actually tried to dig into Corey's situation and understand who he is and what's going on in his life. And he asked Corey, when he'd gotten in trouble for the second or third or fourth time, and he was kind of coming to the end of his rope with that, he asked Corey one day, he said, man, why are you doing this? Tell me more about what's going on. In fact, he said, Corey, tell me someone in your family, one person in your family that doesn't use drugs. And Corey thought for about 2 minutes. And finally he said, I think I have an aunt who his whole family sort of gathers together there in the home that he's in. He said, I think my aunt doesn't use. I'm not entirely sure. I've just never seen her, but I think my aunt doesn't use. And Brandon continues to dig into this, and what he figures out is that he learns that Corey doesn't just get in trouble. There's more to it than that. In fact, Corey's parents are using him because he was only 16 at the time. Corey's parents use him, that they put drugs on him, give them to him, for him to take to the high school to deliver to another teenage kid to deliver to his parents. And this was Corey's situation. Brandon takes all this into consideration, and a few weeks later, indeed, Corey gets in trouble again, and he's sent to what we call in-school suspension. And my brother's alerted to the situation. He's sent down to deal with Corey. He's probably going to have to be removed from school at this point. But he goes straight down to the ISS, to in-school suspension, and he goes to Corey, and he goes straight up to him, and he says, Corey, look me in the eye, which is very hard for Corey to do. He says, look me in the eye, and Corey looks up eventually. And Brandon bends down over to him and says, Corey, do you want out? Do you want out? And Corey says, show me how. I don't know how to get out of this. We keep talking about that, and then eventually the conversation transitions into he wants to know what my job looks like and what my day-to-day looks like. And within 3 minutes of that conversation about Corey, within 3 minutes, my brother looks at me and he says, I just don't understand how what I do on a daily basis is as important as what pastors and missionaries and seminary professors do. That's hard to hear, isn't it? But what's harder to hear? Is it Corey's story that hurts? Or is it Brandon's comment about his job somehow being inferior that hurts? There's something about this story, I think, that illustrates a deep problem that we have in the church. It illustrates what I think of as the deep divide between the pulpit and the pew. This major divide between the pulpit and the pew that should never have existed to begin with. And it does come from this notion that somehow has been reinforced in the culture of our church. Well, why would Brandon make such a comment? It has nothing to do with a lack of intelligence. It's not out of insecurity. It has something to do with the culture that we've bred in the church that says that the pastors, the ordained among us, stand up here and everyone else sits down there. And I'm just not sure that that's healthy. And to be more honest with you, I'm not sure that the language of Scripture will allow us to do that. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 and 12, Paul says this. Speaking about Christ, he said that he gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors, and some teachers. He acknowledges this, what we might call this fivefold gifting of the ministry. And to be honest with you, I don't know exactly what all five of those things are and how they translate into right now, but we can at least understand that it's associated with what we now think of as pastors and elders, or that role, that responsibility in our community of faith. That Christ has gifted these people, but he doesn't stop there. He says that he goes on and tells us he's gifted these people for this reason, to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. To equip the saints for the work of the ministry. There are these pastors and elders and certain people in our congregation, certain people in our community of faith that Christ has gifted in a certain way, but not as an end in themselves and not for them to stand on the platform, but gifted in such a way as to equip the rest of the body. Indeed, if we keep reading, for the building up of that body. But here's the funny thing about this passage, is that we tend to think the second that we read about this fivefold gifting, the pastors, elders, prophets, apostles, teachers, and so on, we see that and we assume those are the people that do the ministry, but that's just not the language of Paul. He won't let us get away with this kind of thing. There can't be that kind of divide here. Paul says those people have been gifted to equip everyone else. In other words, this ministry that we have, those who are ordained among us, the ones who literally do wear the clerical collars, that there is something about our ministry that's central. This ministry of word and prayer that's central to the community of faith, but not superior. I want to repeat that because there's a centrality to the ministry of those ordained to the ministry of word and prayer, but not a superiority. We have to recover that. We have to read clearly and read closely about that. The role of the ordained among us is to equip those who are in our pews, who occupy the vocations of the rest of the kingdom. Who occupy the vocations and the ministries of the rest of the kingdom. My job as a pastor, my job as a professor, those ordained among us, think about the saints who sit in your pews and the ministries that they have. And how are you equipping them? The truck drivers, the stay-at-home moms, the sanitation workers, the public policy makers who address some of the things that you've already heard about today, the high school principals. What are you doing to help them, to equip them, to flex their ministry of reconciliation in God's world? Corey will never come to my class. He'll never knock on my door. He'll never walk down my hall. He'll never come ask for help from me. But for Brandon, there are dozens of Coreys that walk down his hall every day. And there are Coreys who sit across from your cubicle and who come into your barbershop. And there are opportunities that you have to minister to them. Indeed, it's your calling and part of your vocation to do so. Some of you in the audience are pastors, and I would ask you to consider, what are you doing to help better equip the saints, the workers in the pews of your church, to flex their ministry of reconciliation in God's world? And the rest of you, the saints among us, I would argue that when you put on the clothing of your job, when you put on the uniform of your job, whether it's a hard hat and boots or a suit and a tie or an apron, regardless of what it is, when you put that on, you don the clerical collar. Get to work in the ministry of reconciliation. Thanks for hearing our first set of talks for the evening. Mr. Hutchison, I invite you back up.